What is consciousness? How does it originate? Why does it seem to be a trait primarily found in some living organisms with relatively complex brains? How does the brain generate the feeling of existence? Why each of us has our own inner universe? How does the functioning of the 86 billion brain cells create this seemingly metaphysical realm of thoughts and emotions? Does it all come from some precise arrangements of cell connections in the brain? Is there an aspect of consciousness that can't be explained by physical facts alone? Is it an intrinsic aspect of nature that exists beyond the physical laws? Being human and having subjective experiences is a truly remarkable and privileged experience. But what if this extraordinary experience expands beyond biological entities? Could there be also an experience comparable to being a star or a planet? Where does consciousness originate? When it begins? Why does it exist within us? Why does it exist at all? Consciousness is having experience. What is it like to be? It's the unique subjective experience of being the self. It's our ability to perceive ourselves and the world around us. It's what gives meaning to existence, allowing us to form memories, experiences, and emotions. Without experiencing sleep or occasional anesthesia, we might not be able to fully appreciate this remarkable privilege of being awake, self-aware, and conscious. A universe without consciousness is like a stage with no actors, a song with no listeners, or a book with no readers. A universe with no experience of seeing, thinking, feeling, perceiving, or understanding. It's like the whole world is in deep sleep, waiting for something to wake it up. In its absence, there would be no sense of self. What's the point of existence if there's no one around to experience it? Unlike external objects in the universe, consciousness seems to be the only internal phenomenon, exclusively belonging to certain organized structures, like the human brain. An incredibly complex system with billions of brain cells, or neurons. Neurons are specialized cells that communicate with each other through hundreds of trillions of connections, a vast network of interconnected circuits. Each neuron can connect to thousands of others, creating a complex web of communication. These connections form the neural networks that underlie thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Although we can examine brain activities and correlate brain states with specific conscious experiences, the exact nature of consciousness and how it arises from physical processes has always been a mystery. Regardless of the level of complexity, there seems to be no inherent barrier to crack the mechanisms behind how the brain and body produce perception, cognition, learning, and behavior. But the real mystery is to understand how and why these functions are associated with conscious experience. We still lack an explanation for how matter leads to the formation of the mind, how tangible matter, composed of atoms and molecules, gives birth to the intangible realm of thoughts, emotions, and conscious awareness. On one end of the spectrum lies physicalism, the view that all existing entities, including human minds, originate from the reorganization and interactions of physical particles and forces that came into being following the birth of the universe. There's nothing in the world but physical entities and physical interactions. Everything that exists is ultimately physical in nature. A more specific form of this view, named reductive physicalism, goes further to claim that complex phenomena like consciousness can be fully reduced to and explained by fundamental physical processes of the brain. Changes in brain activity like neural firing patterns are correlated with changes in conscious experience. The alternative view, non-reductive physicalism, claims that consciousness is dependent on physical processes, but it can't be fully reduced to them. Think of a symphony. The instruments and musicians can be compared to physical processes and consciousness to the music itself. There's more to the music than just notes and performers, like the intentions behind composer's mind and the emotions the music triggers, which can't be fully grasped by simply analyzing the instruments and players. In the same vein, while consciousness is influenced by brain activities, it's not solely determined by them. Consciousness has properties or aspects that are irreducible to purely physical descriptions, even though it's connected to physical activities in the brain. Physical processes may underlie and influence conscious experiences, but there are these subjective qualities of consciousness, like recalling a cherished memory, or the sensation of seeing the color blue, that resist complete reduction to physical processes. Experiencing blueness is inherently subjective, something that can only be directly experienced by the individual undergoing it. No amount of description or explanation can fully convey the subjective quality of seeing blueness to someone who has never experienced it. We can communicate an approximation of the actual experience using language, but the depth of the subjective experience is beyond verbal description. Imagine being privileged to gaze at an alien galaxy right in front of your eyes, an extraordinary cosmic beauty, extended thousands of light years with galaxies' majestic dust lanes and billions of stars, glowing softly against the backdrop of deep space. Describing this experience to someone who has never been into intergalactic space and witnessed the galaxy involves more than explaining some astronomical details. It's about conveying the overwhelming sense of scale and glory, the feeling of insignificance, yet profound connection to the universe. These are raw feelings of what it's like to perceive the world. Each type of experience carries its own unique set of subjective qualities, like the perception of colors, sounds, tastes, smells, and abstract experiences like emotions, moods, and mental imagery. But how do neural activities give rise to the rich mixtures of experiences and feelings? Emergentism, a specific form of non-reductive physicalism, claims that although consciousness is a product of physical processes in the brain, it has irreducible and unpredictable properties that can't be explained by examining those processes in isolation. Just as the properties of water like liquidity and transparency emerge from the interactions of individual water molecules, consciousness comes from the dynamic organization of physical elements in the brain. However, the liquidity and transparency of water can be explained by the interactions of its individual parts, but the unique qualities of consciousness can't be predicted or fully explained by examining its parts separately. It's not seen as a separate or some metaphysical entity, but rather as a complex result of the organization and neural activities in the brain, an emergent feature of complex biological systems. When a large group of people come together, a variety of complex behaviors and interactions can emerge that are not present in any single individual. Similarly, within the brain, the billions of neurons and their connections form a highly complex network that gives rise to consciousness. Individual neurons lack self-awareness, but somehow the collective interactions of 86 billion neurons in the brain bring this phenomenon into existence. Consciousness is information, and will only emerge within a system of interacting elements when the system reaches a certain level of complexity. It won't emerge from a system of entirely independent components, like a collection of isolated particles within a vacuum. It also won't rise from a perfectly ordered system, like perfectly ordered atoms in a solid crystal. A system must have a certain level of complexity to produce information. Neither too much independence nor too much dependence among its elements. Self-organization theory, a subtype of emergentism, views consciousness as a dynamic process emerging from self-organizing properties of neural networks. Self-organization is the spontaneous emergence of order and complexity in a system without external guidance or control. Spontaneous emergence of coherent patterns of neural activity and connectivity in the brain give rise to higher-level cognitive functions and subjective experiences. Spontaneity is the key point linking self-organization to emergentism. A group of elements lacking distinct patterns or with minimal organization spontaneously give rise to organized patterns and structures. A laser beam is an example of how individual elements, in this case photons, can organize themselves into a coherent and focused beam of light. Numerous frequencies of light in a laser beam interact, yet only one frequency persists after self-organization. This single frequency, characteristic of a laser, represents the dominant group of frequencies that have aligned, highlighting the emergent property of coherence in the system. Social networks, both online and offline, demonstrate self-organization as individuals connect and interact with one another. Through decentralized interactions and communication, social networks manifest emergent properties like the formation of communities, the spread of information and ideas, and the emergence of collective behaviors and norms. Neurons make connections and spontaneously organize into patterns of activity. Patterns can range from simple bursts of electrical activity to complex firing patterns across large neuron populations. Only interactions between neural elements of a certain critical density can form connections. Once a specific threshold of relationships is reached, self-organization emerges, and the sense of self comes into being. Through self-organization, the brain learns new skills, forms memories, and recovers from injury. Assuming this is how consciousness comes into being, its exact mechanisms is a mystery. There could have been no consciousness at the beginning of the universe, and it might be totally non-existent at the very end. At some point, somehow consciousness emerged. That point in time was a pivotal moment, maybe the most remarkable moment in the entire history of the universe, because that's what gives meaning to existence. In a universe devoid of any observer, conscious beings capable of experiencing and interpreting the world, events of all sorts and scales would happen without anyone recognizing or reflect upon their significance. With the emergence of consciousness, the universe switched from being perceived as meaningless to becoming significant. Maybe this shift was inevitable, as if the universe needed consciousness to give itself value and meaning. Consciousness might also be described in relation to entropy, a force that dictates the flow of energy and the evolution of the universe over time. Entropy measures the likelihood of a system being in a specific configuration. An orderly system has low entropy. A disordered system has high entropy. A system is more likely to evolve into a state of disorder. Air molecules across Earth's atmosphere don't spontaneously gather from all directions towards a particular region on the planet, simply because it's so unlikely that it never happens. So entropy is the inherent tendency of energy to spread out. This is what's happening to our universe on a cosmic scale. Energy becomes more diffuse over time. Since the Big Bang, the universe has been transitioning from a state of low to high entropy, which is a natural progression over time. Many theories have been put forward in favor of hidden links between entropy and consciousness. Subjective experience could be an emergent property rising from dynamic interplay of energy, entropy, and information in the brain. Similar to the universe, our brains could be wired to maximize information content and entropy, allowing for greater flexibility and adaptability in processing information. By maximizing information exchange, brain gains the capacity to explore a wide range of possible states and responses, and that leads to rich and diverse conscious experience. Consciousness could also be associated with states of low entropy. Entropy reduction, energy efficiency, high organization, and coherence in this view are fundamental forces guiding the evolution of complex systems like the human brain. Brain's capacity to reduce entropy, minimize uncertainty, and increase order results in greater organization and more complexity, giving rise to sophisticated and self-organized set of patterns that form consciousness. The third speculation, named balanced or intermediate entropy, argues that the brain maintains a balanced state between order and disorder, also called critical state or edge of chaos, where the brain is neither too ordered, which can lead to rigid, non-flexible behavior, nor too disordered, which results in chaotic, non-coherent behavior. Consciousness emerges from the brain's ability to maintain this critical state. The exact relationship between entropy and consciousness in all these theories is unknown. A radical theory reverses the conventional matter-to-mind approach to the problem of consciousness. The theory starts with consciousness and tries to explain how matter might emerge as a consequence. It shakes up the usual physicalist ideas about subjectivity, claiming that consciousness is an omnipresent feature of the universe, like mass or electric charge. Contrary to the vast majority of theories claiming that it comes into being solely in complex systems like the human brain, subjectivity here is shown as the foundation of physical reality. Entering Panpsychism, where consciousness permeates the fabric of existence. Physical science describes the physical world using numbers, dimensions, and measurements. But consciousness primarily involves qualities that can't be expressed in these scientific terms. The feeling of gazing up at the starry night, watching the Milky Way galaxy stretch across the sky, or an intense energy burst releasing from the sun. These are qualities that can't be fully described using only quantitative language of physical science. As long as we describe the brain using only purely quantitative language of neuroscience, such qualities will unavoidably be excluded and leave out consciousness. In Panpsychism, consciousness is seen as an essential and widespread aspect of the entire cosmos. It questions the common belief that consciousness is restricted solely to biological organisms. The basic components of reality, like elementary particles, electrons, or quarks, have extremely simple forms of experience. Even a photon could potentially have some rudimentary form of subjective experience, but at such a minimal level that it would hardly be perceivable. At so unimaginably low level that it'll almost feel like nothing to be a photon. Human subjectivity is seen as a highly developed version of consciousness that exists throughout the universe, and somehow is built upon these much simpler forms of consciousness. Subatomic particles have some form of consciousness that comes together and becomes more complex in more advanced systems. Everything in the universe, from the smallest particles to humans, planets, and galaxies, have some level of consciousness. This doesn't mean that particles have thoughts and feelings as humans do, but rather there is some form of subjectivity inherent in everything, even if it's extremely basic. Panpsychism may seem like a spiritual belief, yet many of its advocates reject the belief in a transcendent reality. The proponents argue that conventional scientific approach falls short in explaining consciousness. But if some are inclined towards a spiritual view of reality, Panpsychism offers a more aligned perspective. It offers the presence of a higher form of consciousness at the core of all existence. Physicalism claims that consciousness can be entirely explained by physical science, since everything, including mental states and processes, are seen as physical. From a dualist perspective, there are two fundamental parts to reality, physical and non-physical, and consciousness is something external that exists beyond the physical processes in the brain, but at the same time, it's closely linked to it. Panpsychism is the middle ground. Both physicalism and panpsychism recognize the physical world as the fundamental reality. However, in panpsychism, beyond the boundaries defined by physical science, the world is built upon the foundation of consciousness. It's not something beyond the physical realm as dualists argue. Instead, consciousness is the foundation for how physics describes the world. Panpsychism bridges the gap between consciousness and physics by proposing that consciousness is an intrinsic part of the universe itself. Every physical entity, no matter how elementary, has some degree of consciousness. The lines between material and the mental realms in panpsychism becomes blurry. Physics explains what matter does, while consciousness is its essence. Matter can be seen as the manifestation of consciousness. In a way, it's not just another entity. Consciousness essentially is all there is. It underlies all existence. The idea that dualism holds any fundamental validity contradicts everything we've learned throughout the history of physics. We've explored many apparently separate subjects like space and time, or matter and energy, only to discover that they're actually different aspects of a single, more fundamental entity like space-time or matter-energy. In essence, physics tells us that dualistic descriptions hint at a deeper understanding that is non-dualistic. If mind and matter truly have no connection, then why do they coexist in the same world and interact so closely? At the most fundamental level of reality, there are networks of extremely simple conscious entities. These entities have basic forms of experience and interact predictably. Through these interactions, they manifest certain mathematical structures. In the language of physics, these mathematical structures, or as panpsychism likes to identify them, conscious entities, are conceptualized as particles, fields, and their properties such as mass, spin, and charge. If matter fundamentally consists of different forms of consciousness as the theory claims, then the way these basic forms combine to create the consciousness we experience becomes a fascinating field of study. Scientists and philosophers always look for the simplest and most concise theory of reality that corresponds to scientific data. And dualism is still considered a rather unrefined and complex theory. In dualism, reality is separated into physical and metaphysical world of consciousness. These are fundamentally different realities, which is why panpsychism, in comparison, is a simpler and more unified perspective of reality. From a panpsychist point of view, physicalism is incomplete and doesn't correspond to reality as a whole, because it doesn't inherently account for consciousness. While dualism might be in agreement with reality, panpsychism claims that not only it aligns with scientific data, but also offers a simpler explanation than dualism. Every fringe theory comes with its own set of problems. For starters, critics believe that panpsychism doesn't clarify how tiny consciousness units combine to form more complex conscious entities, nor does it provide any predictions that can be empirically tested. Critics also argue that panpsychism leads to a kind of panpsychist absurdity, where everything in the universe, including inanimate objects, has some form of consciousness, which they find difficult to reconcile with our ordinary understanding of consciousness and the mind. Attributing consciousness to non-biological entities, even down to the most elementary particles, lacks empirical evidence and falls outside the realm of scientific inquiry. Having consciousness as the fundamental layer of reality seems like the God of the gaps argument, where the concept of God is employed to fill gaps in scientific knowledge. Just as the God of the gaps, panpsychism proposes that consciousness is invoked to explain the aspects of the universe that current scientific frameworks struggle to account for, like the emergence of consciousness in living organisms. The worriedness about theories like panpsychism or arguments like the God of the gaps is that they risk halting scientific progress by providing untestable explanations for complex phenomena. Instead of pushing for more scientific understanding, they may serve as placeholders for gaps in knowledge, hindering the search for naturalistic explanations. In the absence of a metaphysical assurance about the self and the universe, Physicalism is often regarded by its supporters as the most compelling explanation. They believe they have a promising framework for integrating subjective experience into our understanding of the natural world, bridging the gap between physical and mental realities. Explaining consciousness is a fundamentally different task from other scientific endeavors. In science, the aim is to explain behavior by breaking it down into simpler forms. In the case of consciousness, the goal is to explain intangible subjective qualities that are not observable from the outside but are immediately perceivable to the individual. Maybe the reason why materialism remains dominant is because people praise the remarkable success of science, which they should, believing that it'll eventually crack the code of consciousness. But maybe we need to take a radically different explanatory approach. Addressing consciousness is an interdisciplinary endeavor. Science might be able to explain the association of physical brain activities with conscious experiences. But there's a deeper question. Why do specific brain activities align with particular conscious experiences? The second question can't be answered purely through experiments. One promising theory claims that consciousness is fundamental, like mass or charge, in the sense that something or someone either has it or doesn't. And if something does have it, it must have specific properties, mainly a certain amount of integrated information. A novel, non-reductive approach to understanding consciousness focuses on specific patterns of integrated information within a system like human brain. The word integrated refers to the holistic and interconnected nature of information processing, something that according to the theory is essential for the emergence of consciousness. This new theoretical framework called Integrated Information Theory, or let's call it IT, tries to quantify the level of consciousness based on the amount of integrated information it contains. Consciousness here is about how different parts of a system work together and influence each other to create a unified and irreducible experience, emerging from the way information is organized and interconnected. Consciousness is the irreducible nature of the information generated by a system. This intrinsic information processing gives rise to subjective experience, or what it is like to be that system. Within a complex, interconnected networks of information processing, each element of the network contributes to the whole in a meaningful way. This means that consciousness can't be attributed to individual neurons or brain regions, but it emerges from the interactions among them. Any rich conscious experience comes from a complex pattern of cause and effect interactions arranged in a specific order. A key implication of the theory is that consciousness doesn't belong exclusively to biological systems, but can potentially arise in any system that has the right informational structures and dynamics. The theory measures the degree of consciousness by evaluating how different parts of a system interact and influence each other. Depending on the extent of integration within a system, its conscious experiences could range from very simple to highly complex. This has a significant impact on our ideas of what could potentially be conscious beyond traditional biological definitions. Consciousness is found at the level where there is the highest degree of interconnected information, and the theory aims to provide a mathematically precise definition of this level of integration. Water, as an example, lacks the necessary integrated information for consciousness to emerge. Water molecules have some degree of organization, but they don't form a unified whole that experiences a subjective state or engages in complex information processing. What makes the brain special is its large amount of interconnected information. This is why the theory argues that the foundation of consciousness is not at the micro level, the scale of individual particles, but the macro, large scale of everyday objects in the brain. Going back to panpsychism, even the smallest entities in the universe have some basic form of consciousness. Incorporating this with IT, those micro-conscious elements combine and interact to form more complex conscious experiences in more complex systems like human brain. The difference between these two theories is that IT focuses on complex systems. It doesn't attribute consciousness to every system, especially those lacking the complexity and information integration found in living organisms. But the question still remains: how is it that the brain is responsible for this extraordinary conscious experience we're all aware of? Why and how the mind is the outcome of the brain processes? So the brain to mind is a challenging approach in explaining subjective experience, if not impossible. The essence of consciousness could be truly impossible to extract from the brain. Maybe the mystery of consciousness can't be unlocked by just simply examining the brain in more and more detail. The beauty, colors, and vivid experiences of consciousness, the inner universe of the mind, won't simply squeeze out of neurons. Seems like a different approach needs to be taken. Instead of solely focusing on the brain, the theory begins with consciousness itself by first categorizing its essential properties, the fundamental attributes of having an experience. 1. The awareness of being conscious and having experiences, a level of self-reflection or meta-awareness that one can recognize and reflect upon its own mental states. 2. Each experience is structured. Perceptions, thoughts, and emotions are integrated and interact with each other in a specific way, an order that is essential for the richness and coherence of our experiences. 3. Each experience is special in its own way. What makes every experience special is what the theory defines as information, which in this context is the specific content and organization of the experience. 4. Each experience is the result of interconnected information and can't be decomposed into smaller parts. Breaking down an experience into isolated components would fail to capture its true nature. 5. Each conscious experience is exclusive to the individual undergoing it. There could be commonalities in the general structure of experiences, but the subjective quality of each experience is unique to the individual's perspective and can't be replicated or fully understood by others. Every experience must follow these principles. Any conscious entity in the universe must have structured, informative, integrated, and exclusive experiences. So the mind-to-brain approach is about understanding how physical systems, including the brain, should be structured and function to explain these fundamental properties. IT predicts that integrated information breaks down in unconscious states, like during general anesthesia, when an individual is effectively switched off, transitioning from being like an object to returning to its personal state. It's not that people fall asleep during this state, but they're really not there. It's a state comparable to the nothingness before birth or after death. But why? During anesthesia, the functional connectivity between different parts of the brain decreases, resulting in reduced communication between these regions. The brain remains active, but there are specific disruptions in the communication between different areas. During wakefulness, groups of neurons work together closely, but during anesthesia, they become more isolated and don't interact as much. Hence, the information integration breakdown, which is in agreement with the theory. This results in a state of unconsciousness that lacks subjective experience and awareness. When consciousness returns, so does integrated information. Also, when we dream, integrated information is present, but it breaks down during deep sleep. Upon waking, information integration comes back, and the brain acts as a unified entity, the return of consciousness. So consciousness involves a kind of cause and effect relationship that can be measured through information. The way information is organized in the brain might tell us how conscious someone is. IT proposes that consciousness exists on a spectrum. Any system that integrates information in a certain way will have some level of consciousness. Based on what IT qualifies as conscious, even if one were to simulate not just someone's behavior, but also how their neurons interact, that simulation wouldn't result in consciousness. To be conscious, an entity must be of a specific physical kind that can constrain its past and future in a particular way, something that a simulation can't be. For an entity to be conscious, its physical nature must allow it to have a structured relationship with its past experiences and future possibilities. A conscious entity has a specific physical structure that enables it to interact with its environment and internal states in a meaningful way. This interaction allows the entity to have experiences that are coherent and connected over time. Memories from the past shaped current perceptions and decisions, and actions taken now influence future outcomes. This interconnectedness and continuity of experience are essential aspects of consciousness. Just as mass and charge can be simulated and their interactions described, aspects of consciousness can be simulated. However, actual consciousness necessitates specific properties that can't be replicated. In terms of humans, consciousness involves specific physical properties of the brain and body, including brain's structure, the way neurons are connected, the types of neurotransmitters and receptors present, the overall structure of the nervous system, and also the physical environment in which the entity exists, including its sensory inputs and interactions with the world. Without these specific physical attributes, there won't be a true consciousness. Even if a computer system were capable of simulating human behavior down to its entire neuronal interactions, it wouldn't necessarily result in consciousness. Maybe unless the system also demonstrates the requisite level of information integration. This is why it would be impossible to upload consciousness to a computer. If a technology could upload every activity of a brain, even down to the quantum level, into a computer, according to IT, the resulting entity on the other side, even if it behaves indistinguishably from the original person, wouldn't be the same individual and wouldn't have any corresponding conscious experience. The process would end up creating a perfect zombie, someone who mimics the original person very precisely, but without the true consciousness of the original being present. A perfect clone of someone also wouldn't be the same as the original. Even though the clone would have an identical physical structure and possibly exhibit similar behaviors, it wouldn't share the same integrated information that constitutes the original person's consciousness. Therefore, according to IT, the clone would be a distinct individual with its own consciousness. There is no subjective experience to be the objective word, at least not as profoundly as human subjectivity. There's no meaningful experience of being an atom, star, planet, galaxy, or universe. However, there is undeniably something unique about the subjective experience of being an intelligent being and experiencing those fascinating objects. In IT's framework, consciousness is intrinsic information originating from within. There's no subjective experience of being a galaxy like it exists for us. The essence of intrinsic information is the most valuable treasure in the universe. A universe filled with objects but devoid of observers would be meaningless. We are just beginning to comprehend how the organization of the brain might affect our consciousness. It's an extraordinary endeavor to dive into, an indicator that we're all interconnected by the same set of laws that regulate the universe. Opponents of the theory see integrated information theory as pseudoscience due to its connection to panpsychism. Consciousness is a complex emergent phenomenon that comes from specific arrangements of matter and information processing only within highly organized systems like the human brain. But IT extends this principle to suggest that consciousness could also be present in other systems that aren't necessarily as complex as the human brain. The criticism is that the fundamental claims of the theory can't be effectively tested, and they have strange consequences about which entities would be conscious. Proponents argue that all theories of consciousness are hard to test. IT is the most ambitious, carefully formalized and mathematically precise theory of consciousness, which inherently raises expectations for accurate predictions. Those advocating for the theory are concerned that criticisms could harm the field and potentially delay scientific progress in understanding consciousness for another century. The origin of consciousness could remain as one of the deepest mysteries of the universe. It took a while for science to grasp how difficult it is to nail down the ultimate nature of consciousness, if not impossible. Science can observe and analyze the physical processes of neuron firing through sophisticated imaging techniques. But bridging the gap between neural activities and vivid experiences of consciousness turns out to be far more challenging, and there's a non-zero chance that it might be something beyond the capacity of science to figure out. The mystery of neuron firing and its relationship to experience is a reminder of boundless complexity of the human brain and the profoundness of our subjectivity. There's no doubt that consciousness is something truly extraordinary and special. It's the only thing that is like to be, the sole experience of existence. It's the only inherently existing thing that we know of, the only thing that is truly real, not just in a relative sense. Integrated information theory provides a framework for understanding how consciousness could potentially emerge in simpler physical systems and its existence in varying degrees. Panpsychism insists that consciousness isn't solely a product of complex biological systems like the human brain, but is inherent in the fabric of reality itself. All physical systems, regardless of their complexity, possess some degree of consciousness. If panpsychism holds true, then brains don't produce consciousness, but rather use it. Consciousness was omnipresent prior to the existence of any brain, forever roamed and wandered throughout the cosmos, an eternal presence in the fabric of existence. Consciousness not only permeates matter, but is also the fundamental nature of it. If this is the case, then we no longer need to be concerned with how lifeless matter gives rise to consciousness, as consciousness has always existed, inherent in the very fabric of the universe.